Hello, and welcome to this walkthrough of Visual Studio. No, sorry, Cursor. Cursor is based on Visual Studio Code, as many elements of Cursor are very similar to that. What is happening here is they added several AI features and broke several of the VS Code's internal procedures. We should go over everything that works and doesn't work. But when you open Cursor, you'll see an environment. The environment is very similar to VS Code. It has open projects and connecting to a remote environment, and then even cloning a repository as a start point. The corner, you can see that you have remote connections. This is probably an advanced topic, but very important. For example, when you're on your laptop and your computer at home is more capable and has your data, you can connect directly to that computer and work on it as if you have established a tunnel. Tunnel is basically a wrapper around SSH connection, but much more robust and supports data transfer, command transfer, and byte transfer out of the box. Okay, when you press F1, basically similar to VS Code, opens the settings, and probably the first thing that you want to check is cursor settings, specific to cursor. Here, you see a couple of things are about general settings for cursor, but probably the most important part is the part in chat. For example, when you want to chat, you can have the first interaction chat element, for example, agent, ask, or other modes. Also, settings for context, how if some of the tools you wanted to work or not work. More importantly, if you want to have auto run, for example, auto run means that when you command it to do something, like especially the agent, as it says, allow the agent to run tools, if it needs to run other tools like listing files or writing a file, editing, deleting, or something, then you should enable this to be able to do that. Otherwise, it doesn't do that. It has granular control. You can limit what it can do or cannot do. For example, I have only file deletion protection. Otherwise, the others are all active. There are other settings that based on your usage, you will see and understand. The other one is models. That probably is more important because you can add many models. Like there are many models here. What I'm using currently is Claude, but before that, Gemini is very good also. Gemini is from Google. It has a much larger context and good coding capabilities. GPT-4.1 is basically like a go-to models to work on. There is a cost associated with any of these. For example, this says the cost is about 75% of a request, or this one is 0.5%. This is one request. I think this doesn't accept Bitrop. Yeah, it says max only. If we look at this O3, for example, this one that is like the older model, now it is 2 requests. For each request is a concept of cursor for the cost that you incur with the pro plan, $20 per month. You get 500 requests to make. Basically makes each request equal to 4 cents. Each request is not just one interaction with cursor agents. It is basically one prompt that you send and then 25 subsequent actions that cursor makes. And that makes it very attractive. So I want to close this. And this is like probably like the most thing that you want to know about cursor settings. Okay, so let's open a project and then I want to open the Claude MCP. So let's try this. The Anthropic MCP SDK, for example. And this is going to be basically like the thing that you're going to see when you open any repositories. One thing is that I have switched this panels. What you see usually is that the chat is on the left and sorry, the chat is on the right and this panel is on the left, but let me try and see if I can change it.
What did you just open? Because I was taking notes and
I just opened a sample repository. This is like the MCP Python SDK. If you search for Anthropic MCP Python, there is a software development kit. This is just like a normal thing. We will try to make a very simple MCP here. I wanted to check if I can change the tabs. Sorry, I don't. Yeah, I don't remember how I can do that. Yeah, I did a long time ago. So you will see the chat on the right panel. Basically, the folder panel is switched. So for you, will be on the left and the right. I switch them because if there is no chat and I'm just developing things, my write-ups do not change. If I switch this off and on, for example, if I make this go away, it just still there. So it doesn't move my write-ups. That's why I'm switching this. Okay. So a couple of things here. These are more, VS Code is very extensible by itself. It is very bare bone. There is nothing much there. For example, I think there is a built-in README Markdown renderer. So if you press F1 and then search Markdown, you will see something like this as a Markdown open block preview to the side. So it just basically makes this preview of the repository that is there. But many other things is not there, and that is being handled by the extensions, what they call as extensions. There are a couple extensions that probably is best to have. One is, for example, Python packages. If you are doing Python, there's a Python package and PyLance. This can be downloaded all together. These are first party, so they are from Microsoft. And then there are a couple more that I like. It is just very stuff. This is a very nice language tool, and that basically tries to even check for grammar, check for code spelling, not code spelling, like the write-up spellings. And it is pretty accurate, pretty robust. So I have Python as well. If you have JavaScript, there's JavaScript as well. A extension that basically visualizes CSVs, makes plots, is similar to Excel underneath VS Code. So anything you have on VS Code as extensions, you can have it here. One setting I forgot to mention is if you go to cursor settings, one is this import from VS Code. If you have a VS Code, but it should be first installed on your system and it should be the stable version of VS Code. If you have the VS Code with all your settings and extensions, you can just import the settings and extensions and it will import it all together. The other one is a privacy mode. So by default, cursor is not in privacy mode, and this is one of the also advantages of having cursor. Privacy mode means that the code that you have, any data that you have, is not shared with Cursor, Anthropic, or any other place. This is like basically a license that Cursor has and industries have, that the code is not shared, is not used for training. It's just like for you. Otherwise, you can have, I don't know, like the shared data, which sends it to Cursor and other places.
I set mine to share data. I guess I should set it to privacy mode.
Because the codes that we are developing, it is not so serious, but at the same time, this is probably important because then it just reads. The other thing is that it's similar to this. For each folder that you open, it starts indexing. It reads everything or the topics of every file that is there, so it can find it faster later on. When you have the shared data, everything is being shared. So that's not the best idea, at least for developers. So that's it. For example, we can add a folder. We want to just add an MCP to get the current date and time, basically making an MCP that gets the current date and time and reports it to LLMs. This is like a time MCP, for example. This is called Workspace, and then you can add a folder to the workspace. So for example, let's call it time MCP. You can see that now you have a workspace here, which is untitled, but you can save this workspace as well. You go to files and then go to save workspace as, and then you save the workspace. It is a workspace dot. I'm going to save it in the time MCP too. So it is a simple JSON, and it is very simple. It just says, hey, the two folders that should be here is the current folder and also MCP Python sticky. Before last month, Cursor didn't support multi-folders, so the workspace overall. But from a couple of weeks ago, it just also supports that. So basically, you can have a scope that is much larger. So multiple versions of multiple repositories all together and can cross-traverse through the whole thing. This is very good because when developing, we can make sure that you're reading this MCP SDK as well. So here, what I'm going to do is, for example, please try to make a simple MCP that gets the right current thing and time zone of the shell. And what you can do is when you type at, you can do many things there. Basically, it is like these are built-in tools that you can have. We can do basically any of these that are here. It is like it is passing the readme here. And this is pretty cool. And you just hit enter. If it is agent, it reads it and tries to implement, it just gives you, basically you can ask what this, for example, MCP Python SDK is. So this is just ask. So this is not agent. So what it does is starts thinking and then reading what is happening there and tries to answer my question. There is nothing more. But you can see that it is reading as much as it can. Sometimes it is good to ask because then the context will remain for the next chat that you have, the custom to everything, then probably you can have it starting from agent. Yes, of course.
So you did this in chat, and the GitHub thing, it doesn't Copilot, the chat goes away when you switch to agent.
That's the problem. Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That's one of the things that is not there, basically. VS Code is catching up and has a lot to do. VS Code is basically like very new to this. Cursor is now 3 years that is doing it, and it's not perfect, but it is much more robust. Now that there is the context, so when I pass this, basically like that, make a MCP there, it will understand the whole context as well because it is agent. It tries to implement it. So again, this is basically like what we're going to have. And we just look and see what's happening. One thing that has happened is that it is created it under the MCP server. That is basically not okay. You can go on examples and see what is happening. For example, I can follow a simple resource plan that is there or something like that. Can look at simple resource. Yet, does it have access? So, and that so basically what happened is a couple of things that you should add is the GitHub or source control extension. I really like the source control is another thing. I don't know if it is there by default or not, but there's also another one that is pull request extension that issues and pull requests are all there as well.
So how many, when it goes and gets each one of those resources, is that considered as one of the 25 in the?
That's a good question. Usually, let's go back. So this is one. And then this is another one. So reading everything, the whole thing is one call. And then switching to time MCP is another call. And then I don't know, adding pipe project is another call. You can see like these are basically like each one of them is another call. If you press Control J or Command J, you also have this access to this terminal, built-in terminal. If it is, you do not have it. You can have it on top. There is a toggle panel. And you can see that everything is being added one after one. So I think it seems that everything is running.
Which one of the 500 corresponds to one request and 25 call?
This is one request that I have. And still it is continuing. It's not ended still. Now it's finished. So this is one request by itself. And then this is the next request, which didn't work. And then on the third request that we made, it did all of it and tested it and it worked. And basically Now you can, let's look what is there. This is the README, and then you can add a README. It shows what are the tools that or resources that it has, how to install it, and it just also tested it already. So how to install it, how to use it. Basically, it is just like a very simple way of creating a repository by itself.
It's really nice. I love that it generates a README.
The reason it generated the README was because I gave it this example. The example was this simple resource. I create a similar structure which had a README, so it just created a README for it as well. But you can also mention everything that you want. MCPs, as we have all talked about, is Model Context Protocol, basically a way of communicating of different tools or even LLMs with a host LLM. Here is basically any of these models that you can choose that can run tools, so it understands how the MCP works. MCP is not something fancy. It is basically a JSON structure that for each tool, it says what is the name of the tool, how it can be called, inputs, what is the use case of that, and what you should expect as an output. And this basically is given to the LLM, so LLM knows beforehand what tools it has. It is as simple as that. It is nothing fancy at all. So for here, you can go to cursor setting. It's not, it used to be here. So let's just search for MCP now.
Is it under tools?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So basically, like what you have in here is different MCPs. I have a couple. I created like this head MCP, but probably one of the things that are important is GitHub MCP context 7 if you need it, and then TaskMaster. It is now running. Sometimes it is as easy as just turning it on and off. It says that if you have more than 60 tools, it doesn't accept. Interestingly, VS Code has the same thing, but it's 128. It complains about stuff, but at the same time, if you have it, it doesn't kill you.
The TaskMaster AI, what is that?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. TaskMaster, like how if you have a more sophisticated development, you can divide it to different tasks and then try to tackle it one way. So I'm going to talk about that later, but let's talk about GitHub. This is like an official GitHub MCP, and you can see that it has many tools here, like add pull request, create issue, create repository, get commits, and who am I or whatever. So what is this repository? And you can see that there are parameters here, and there is description and everything here. So it is a glorified tool. What I'm going to do is this. Great. Thanks. Now, let's initiate. I'm actually bad with typing. It doesn't really matter for these new models. Let's initiate Git locally for type MCP. Push it. Pause it. For this, I hope that is there. I cannot see it.
But could I ask just another question? So you didn't create a virtual environment or anything?
No.
When you started this?
No. Yep.
For JetBrains, it's the idea.
Those are not virtual environments. Here you have .github.cursor, for example. Yeah, they are there. But we're going to talk about .cursor a little later. Virtual environments, basically, like as long as you have UV or Conda or whatever, then basically you can add it. Here you can see I had UV installed, so it worked, or UV sync or whatever that we have. So now, basically, what I'm going to do here is add git ignore, add to GitHub repository, create a GitHub repository for this in private mode for this, and push it. This is like one of the bugs that GitHub MCP has. GitHub handle is notifications to make sure that it for sure uses. That's it. You can try to ask it to use MCP because I have GH, like GitHub CLI also installed. Sometimes it happens that it just runs the whole thing by itself on GitHub CLI. Let's see what happens. So when it just generating command, you can see that now, because it is generated under version control, sometimes it just throws an error. Now it says, I want to create a GitHub repository. I'll use GitHub MCP. And it used called create repository. And you can see here that, like the call is just, what is the name of, what is the description, what is the private, whatever, so on and so forth. So basically everything is there. And I just pushed it and created a repository. And now, so you can see that it is created, it just already pushed. So everything is there and it is available.
Well, that's nice.
Okay. Any
Yeah.
questions so far?
Is there a Node SDK for, do you know, or JavaScript and MCP?
Yeah, there's a TypeScript, I think. There's a TypeScript MCP SDK, and there is Python SDK. Yeah, you can look it up there.
So
if you have a mixture, I think
if
with the
you have a
mixtures, what they
mixture
did
of
basically is
Python and
Python, like the
JavaScript
UV system,
MCPs,
can get,
will that,
there is the Python
is it
interpreter for
always in
JavaScript,
one
so it
environment
runs the
or
whole thing.
another?
This is one way. The other way is you do not need to do, this is again just a tool call. What GitHub has is a Docker actually container. It's just very small container that, so the whole call is run Docker and then works like that. But that's the whole thing. That's the whole idea.
So you were going to go over the TaskMaster?
Go back. Yes. Sorry, just email. No, I needed to create a new one to show you what is happening there. So let me bring up one of the workspaces that I was working on. Okay. Where are we? I need to share my screen. Okay. So this is basically, welcome to the next session. This is this is like a little more advanced topics here. For that, I'm basically, let me try to close everything. I'm going to talk about how to manage larger projects and how to work off of that. This is an example of head MCP. Basically, you had this from this site that is github.com, neuromechanist, and then head MCP. Look it up later on. This has some integrations with IDE, which is a platform for neuroscience event annotation stuff that I'm working on for my day job. From that integration, you have the server components like head as validators, sidecar generations, analysis of columns of annotations, other stuff. Then actually like most of them embedded in head Python tools. But then from that, the head MCP calls those Python tools with these specific tools that are from these head Python tools. And then basically talks with MCP or the Claude AI or other agents and responds to the user's query. User can also input some files or mention some files for this MCP to run. The way it is developed is what matters, in my opinion. Let me see if I can create one here. Okay, so the way that I did work on this is two things. It requires two specific tools. One is TaskMaster. TaskMaster is a tool that you can easily install. It is free to use. Basically, if you have a plan for software to develop, it tries to make it step by step to different tasks. Second, TaskMaster has an AI underneath it as well. It has Claude, Anthropic, and also Perplexity. Perplexity goes and searches the internet to find similar projects and ideas, and then all of that is passed to Claude underneath TaskMaster. So then the plan is being developed. I will have a blog post for this because I actually made a write-up for how to use and run TaskMaster. But overall, if you have, for example, a new folder, so what you can do is basically do TaskMaster and init, and it just creates it, hopefully. And it just creates a couple of things. And you can see that under test now, we have scripts, task, environment, git ignore, even something for windsurf, and then basically like a guideline how to use TaskMaster. But before that, let's see underneath the cursor what is here. One of the things that is here is cursor rules, and that's actually the main advantage of cursor right now, which is having rules in human language, and then the LLM will try to understand it and follow it. For example, you can mention if you want to have it always attached to the LLM calls or not. This will basically make the context. It should be as concise as possible. Dev workflow is the most important part. It says how to use TaskMaster. For me, I'm going to show you that I have other rules there for head MCP as well. Whatever you want to have to make sure that the LLM follows, uses tools, make sure it commits regularly, it creates branches, do PRs, runs CI/CDs, creates test cases, how to create test cases, what packages to use, whatever you want to have, you can have it in dev workflow, and it is always attached. The TaskMaster enforces its rules or workflow with the cursor rules, but you can also enforce your own rules. So you go under environment, add an Anthropic API key and Perplexity API key. You should get it actually like either from Open Router, which basically can route everything. Ideally, you create 2 accounts under Anthropic and Perplexity API, get an API key, and make sure that change this to Claude 4. If I update my TaskMaster, it should be updated. When you have it, remove this .example, so it becomes an environment. Also, like change the project name. You go to the agent, for example, and then you ask it, you can see that there is an example. So PRD is the product requirement document. This is an example. You should ask your LLM to create this PRD for you. What you should have is, hey, create a PRD for time model context protocol. It's good to have as much detail as possible. So basically, which gets the time, date, and time zone system. You can have this example PRD as a temp and put the PRD there. And then just tries to read it and run. It will add it by itself. When the PRD is done, and sometimes it is overriding it, it's fine, but sometimes it overcomplicates everything. So once the PRD is complete, it's going to be like, you saw that we just created this time MCP in one pass. It's just like 10 calls, 15 calls, and it was running. And hopefully if this runs and we see it, then you're going to see that how complicated it makes it. And this is not a TaskMaster, it's just creating the requirements. And then from the requirements, you can run TaskMaster. Okay, so you just basically accept it. You can see that it is also very simple. Like, what is the use? What are the tools? What are the deliverables, basically? And what are the risks as well? So from that, what you do next is you say, let me show you this example. So now here, what you want to say is parse the PRD, and it will create tasks for you. And then it created tasks. Next is that you ask it to analyze the project complexity with Perplexity TaskMaster itself to analyze each task, how much they're complicated. We just use Perplexity to search about similar projects. So then for the complex tasks, because when you analyze the complexity, it assigns complexity scores to each task. If the task is complex, like score is more than 4 or 5, it just expands it to subtasks. And then it moves forward. You need to create a couple of API keys here. So we are recording, then I need to just go and cancel it. But I'm going to show you what happens when you create this small thing. Once you parse the PR using TaskMaster to analyze the complexity and expand all, these are MCPs. At the same time, you can also run it with TaskMaster, exactly the same analyze complexity, and it works. Then when you do all of this, when you run TaskMaster list, it shows you what are the tasks that it created. This is like my head MCP, so it is already done at least like 4 tasks here, but you can see that it creates tasks, and then you have different things to address. The tasks is under, let me open this now, close this. It is under tasks. Also, it is another JSON. It is just a large JSON that describes everything, task by task. If you want to see, for example, what was task 1, you can say TaskMaster show 1. Okay. You can see that. So from all of that is, again, from the JSON, but this is, for example, like I just called it. So this is like the way it shows. So, hey, this is like project setup. It is done. It is a status, and it is priority. Its priority was high. I think I ran complexity on this, but I don't know why it's not reporting. I'm not sure. But then there is details, there's test strategy, and there's subtasks. And subtasks also have description. So if you do TaskMaster show 1.1, it describes that and goes forward. Basically, we start with task 1, and it starts with task 1, goes to subtasks, moves forward with development and deployment of the whole thing. How we can control how this behaves is with the cursive rules. I have specific rules for this. So my dev workflow is a little different here. So you can see that I have specific rules. For example, branch-based development workflow. My thing is make sure that for each task you start, you create a branch. And I do not like having task in the name of the branch. So do not do that. For each branch, you start with a subtask. Subtask should have a commit, and then you have a description. You need to test the subtasks to make sure it runs. When the subtask starts, you should make it as the status as like here is done, call it in progress. And then when it is completed, put it done. Make sure that all tests are passing, stage and commit. And then once the task is complete, mark it as done. Make sure that all tests are passing. Make sure all commits are pushed, and then create a PR. And that's the whole thing. Because like for this head MCP, I use a Conda environment. So this is like information for Conda environments, making sure I use rough for auto formatting and checking and fixing and everything. It helps a lot with Python fixes. I have this big picture awareness. Python is there. You can access that. I have this plan. You can access that. I have this Python MCP. You can access that too. Then there's so on and so forth, like testing requirements. These all I added it myself. So these parts all not myself, basically, like from experience, I asked the agent to add the things that was breaking unconformities and then added here as tools. But I just iterated on this to make sure that things are passing. With these rules, there are rules for TaskMaster, so it runs pretty smoothly now. My experience is that TaskMaster is very complex because it is designed for complex things. If you have smaller developments, probably like you can basically what you can say is using a very smaller TaskMaster, basically like a LLM base. Say, hey, basically change the whole rules that you have here, follow plan.markdown, plan.md or plan.text. And then you create a plan that is like step by step, and you have all the rules, but you do not use TaskMaster because when it is smaller, the tasks are easier and less complicated. Basically, you have a step-by-step plan that you ask the LLM to create it. And then you just ask it to, after the plan is done, the plan has description. And when the item is done, you just check that item and go to the next. Basically like this, with all TaskMaster parts go away. All this project development things stay mostly, but then the whole development becomes much simpler. From smaller projects, I found that having a smaller structure works better because LLMs are complicated, and when you push it to be complicated, it becomes like super complicated. So that's the whole thing. Unless you try and make error and try, probably. It's just like it's a hard thing to tackle or understand. So I try to make it as approachable as possible. And thank you.
You should turn off the recording.
Oh yeah.